Jeffrey Sean Gebhardt, born on October 27, 1976 in Winter Haven, Florida, appeared to be a pretty normal guy. He enjoyed outdoor activities, including running, hunting, fishing, and camping. Friends and family often described him as an expert in wilderness survival, someone who could handle the challenges of nature with ease. He was known to stay away from drugs and alcohol, had never been married, and had no children. By 2012, at the age of 35, Jeffrey Gebhardt had settled in the quiet town of Blairsville, Georgia, located near the borders of South Carolina and Tennessee. In Blairsville, Jeffrey worked as a butcher at Chambers Slaughterhouse, where he spent his days processing pork and beef. On September 20th, 2012, Jeffrey Gebhardt left his home for what promised to be an exciting 3-day hunting and camping trip with his fellow butcher, co-worker, and friend, David Smith. But this wasn't going to be your typical outdoor adventure. This was a rare opportunity, a hunting excursion nearly a month before the official season began. Jeffrey and David were among just 260 participants granted special access to the Clarks Hill Wildlife Management Area, an enormous area spanning 13,000 acres of dense, untamed wilderness. After arriving at the Holiday Park campground that Thursday, the two friends wasted no time setting up camp, knowing their hunt couldn't begin until the next morning. Early on Friday morning, September 21st, Jeffrey and David set out into the wilderness, ready for a day of hunting. The forest was thick and expansive, its trails winding through the heart of northern Georgia's rugged landscape. For most of the day, the two friends stuck together, working their way through the challenging terrain in search of game. At some point during the day, however, the pair became separated, a common occurrence in such a sprawling area. After some time apart, Jeffrey managed to catch a ride back to the campground parking lot with another hunter he had encountered in the woods. Eventually, he and David were able to reconnect that evening. On the morning of September 22nd, Jeffrey Gebhardt and David Smith set out once again into the vast wilderness of the Clarks Hill Wildlife Management Area. It was the second full day of their 3-day trip, and the pair fell into the same routine, hiking through the dense forest, hunting rifles in hand, scanning the terrain for game. But just like the day before, the two men became separated in the sprawling wilderness. This time, however, their paths didn't cross again so easily. David eventually made his way back to their campsite, but as the hours ticked by, there was still no sign of Jeffrey. By 10 p.m., with the realization that his friend was truly missing, David made the difficult decision to alert the authorities. At 10:12 p.m., he contacted the local police to report Jeffrey as a missing person. Unbeknownst to David, Jeffrey too had been trying to get help. Alone in the wilderness, Jeffrey made a series of frantic calls to 911, explaining that he was lost somewhere in the 13,000-acre wildlife area. His cell signal was weak, and his calls to the Wilkes County 911 center were plagued by dropped connections, making it hard for dispatchers to maintain steady communication. Despite these challenges, authorities were able to piece together enough information to mobilize a search and rescue operation. Officers from the Wilkes County Sheriff's Office, members of the Washington Fire Department, Georgia Department of Natural Resources Rangers, and a team of volunteers and rescue personnel assembled to comb the area. Equipped with spotlights, flashing blue police lights, and blaring sirens, they began their search, hoping to catch Jeffrey's attention and guide him back to safety. Authorities quickly zeroed in on Jeffrey Gebhardt's approximate location using GPS signals from his cell phone. With his disappearance reported only hours earlier, the Georgia State Patrol acted swiftly, deploying a helicopter equipped with advanced thermal imaging technology. By 3 a.m. on Sunday, September 23, 2012, their efforts paid off. The helicopter crew located Jeffrey in a marshy area near Thurmond and Clarks Hill Lakes, a very secluded spot, typically submerged underwater. When ground teams reached the site, it became immediately and heartbreakingly clear. Jeffrey was deceased. His death was brutal and violent. At the scene, investigators were confronted with a puzzling lack of evidence. There were no signs of anyone else being present, no footprints, no disturbed brush, nothing to suggest an encounter with another person. But Jeffrey's injuries told a different story. He had been stabbed 17 times in the chest and once in the upper abdomen. 3 of the wounds had pierced his heart, indicating a deliberate and fatal attack. Nearby, Jeffrey's rifle, backpack, and wallet were found untouched. A blood-stained folding knife was discovered partially beneath his body. His body was transported for forensic examination and autopsy, which was conducted the following day, Monday, September 24, 2012. By September 25th, authorities made it official. Jeffrey Gebhardt's death was being investigated as a homicide. The Wilkes County Sheriff's Office took charge of the investigation, swiftly enlisting the expertise of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to help find out what had happened in the woods that night. The last person known to have contact with Jeffrey Gebhart was his longtime friend and hunting partner, David Smith. The two had shared years of friendship and worked side by side at Chambers Slaughterhouse. According to David, he last saw Jeffrey around 4 p.m. on Saturday, September 22nd, when he dropped him off at his hunting stand. David said he returned later that evening to pick Jeffrey up, but when he arrived, Jeffrey was nowhere to be found. Concerned, David reached out to Jeffrey by phone, assuring him that he would come back to help search for him. Other hunters in the area joined the effort, scouring the dense woods for any trace of Jeffrey. Despite their collective attempts, the search came up empty. With no other options, David and the group decided to call 911. While there were over 250 registered hunters in the Clarks Hill Wildlife Management Area that weekend, none were considered credible suspects, except for David Smith. Special Agent Wendell Goodman of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation reflected on this chilling reality. If it wasn't random, Mr. Smith was the only person in the vicinity that really would have known Mr. Gebhart. In October 2012, Wilkes County Sheriff Mark Moore addressed the press, revealing that investigators were focusing on a smaller circle of individuals. He dismissed the idea of a random violent attack, though he stopped short of naming any official suspects. At the same time, authorities appealed to other hunters who may have been in the area, hoping someone had seen or heard something that could crack the case. But as the months passed, frustration began to mount. By December of 2012, the investigation had come to a standstill. No new evidence emerged, no arrests were made, and no fresh leads reignited the case. The public grew uneasy, as assurances from authorities that there was no killer at large offered little comfort in the face of so many unanswered questions. Then, in August 2013, a grand jury was convened in Wilkes County to review all of the evidence collected by law enforcement. The grand jury's role was to assess whether the case should move forward as an open and active case or be closed entirely. This announcement reignited public interest and raised hopes that a resolution might be near. As the grand jury convened, a previously undisclosed conclusion from the Georgia State Crime Lab added a shocking twist to the case. Their report suggested that Jeffrey's death may have been of his own doing. This assertion, however, was met with widespread skepticism, especially given the brutal and perplexing nature of his injuries. As stated previously, when Jeffrey Gebhart was found at the scene, he had been stabbed 17 times, including several wounds deep enough to pierce his heart and abdomen. While some of the injuries were superficial, the fatal wounds indicated a prolonged and agonizing death. Complicating matters further was the discovery of Jeffrey's body in a secluded, marshy area, with his own hunting knife nearby, covered in blood. Investigators had hoped the knife would yield clues, such as DNA or forensic evidence pointing to another person's involvement. However, extensive testing found no trace of anyone else. All evidence suggested that Jeffrey alone had handled the knife. This conclusion posed a significant challenge to the investigation, as it seemed to imply that Jeffrey inflicted these wounds on himself, an idea that many found difficult, if not impossible, to believe. The grand jury ultimately concluded that Jeffrey's death was due to Jeffrey's own actions, and it was an S-word, but that decision would leave even more questions than answers. The deliberation of the grand jury had been brief, and for those close to Jeffrey, the conclusion felt premature. The grand jury had relied on the absence of evidence pointing to another person's involvement, including the lack of any other footprints at the scene, as well as the findings of the state medical examiner. For many, this explanation just didn't sit right. How could someone inflict such violent and prolonged injuries upon themselves? Jeffrey had been stabbed 17 times, 3 of which fatally pierced his heart. The thought of self-inflicting such wounds was almost unimaginable. And then there was Jeffrey's background as a butcher. If he had decided to end his life, surely he would have chosen a method that was quicker and less excruciating. The location of his death further complicated the narrative. Jeffrey had traveled far from home, deep into the wilderness to a secluded area, with no apparent reason to choose such a remote and inaccessible place. For those who knew him, these details didn't align. For those that knew Jeffrey, it raised the possibility of overlooked evidence, or something that had been missed by police at the scene, and it left them wondering if justice had been fully served. Even now, over a decade later, the mystery of Jeffrey Gebhart's final moments continue to be debated. So what do you think? Could the evidence truly point to self-inflicted wounds, or is there more to this story that has yet to be uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights might shed light on a case that remains an unsolved mystery. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Fireside.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fireside Unsolved. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, take it easy and be easy, you filthy bastards.